tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we'll start off continuing from last week's conversation where I talked about eating vegetarian and some of the Buddhist ideas about that, some of the reasons why in the Theravada tradition, monastics don't make that a regulation because they're accepting whatever's offered, and some of the various reasons for doing so, including ideas about ethics that some folks hold, and differently ideas about renunciation that are connected but not exactly the same. And like the idea about renunciation is the reason, for instance, that I continue to eat vegetarian even though my family doesn't, and I don't like try to make my kid do it. Like I would never put that on someone else because he wouldn't actually be making the renunciate choice. One of the beautiful things about renunciation is that it's only really renunciation if you're choosing it, right? And so, for instance, if you're too poor to buy a certain kind of food, you're not a renunciate in relation to that. You're not making a practice decision to abstain. And so, renouncing meat is a choice that some folks make. And that is, sometimes connected with ethics, like not wanting to cause harm, not wanting to take life. Other times it can be connected to other aspects of practice. One of the interesting aspects of practice that we can feel into around how we participate in the larger economy broadly, and how we participate in the food economy, is in relation to ideas about how our actions contribute to our future lives. And if we hold the ancient Buddhist ideal of not being reborn, then we have a structure for thinking about our own actions, constructing our actions to that end. And so what does it mean to be reborn? One idea is that, the things that keep us being reborn again and again, or however you want to think about that, maybe metaphorically, you're thinking about, a stream of action and awareness that flows through me, that's flowed through my ancestors, and that will continue into the future, something like that. You could think of it a number of different ways. You could think of it in a very non-dual kind of way, understanding that we could be reborn as animals of many different kinds, or spirit beings, as a way of saying, like we did in the meditation, oh, everything is conscious in a certain way, and consciousness can wake up to itself, to its selfness in any form. So spirit beings can say, oh, I'm suffering, or oh, I like this, I don't like this, I wish it were different. That's a kind of self-aware, conscious, feeling. And so maybe reincarnation is a way of saying, oh, we continue to participate in that experience of wakefulness that is shared by many different kinds of beings. And we continue that until we don't. And the mechanism in Buddhism, in the Buddhist teaching, that suggests that it's possible to end the sense of our personal participation in that is that when we end craving entirely, when we uproot the defilements entirely, greed, hatred, and delusion, ignorance about who we really are, right? False ideas of the self and of identity and separateness. When all of that is gone, there's just not the force that compels continued participation in that way. Everything continues. Like we are not leaving because there was no one to be here in the first place. There's a seeing through of that. And so then the thing that ends is just the suffering, right? So when people would ask the Buddha, do you get reborn? He would say it's the wrong question. He wouldn't say no. It's not as literal as that. Like, here I am on the wheel of suffering, and there I am not being born again into the wheel of suffering. I think that's essentially a metaphor for a difficult to describe experience that we have while we're alive. And that experience is of no longer being participating in the round of suffering. And one expression of no longer participating in the round of suffering could be to choose to not take the lives of other animals in a more and more radical way, And so in the Buddhist tradition, this would often look like becoming a monastic, where you are then completely living on what's offered and not accruing the karma, the momentum, the choices that come from participating in the economy as an actor in the economy. You surrender that and you play a different role in the culture, right? It's not that participating in the economy is bad, but it's an incredible and strange thing to do, to set down your own participation in that in order to support others to live in a different way, right? You can think of monastics as people who make it possible for lay people to become more generous and more communal, because lay people support monastics. And so you could become a monastic, choose to be essentially living in intentional poverty, not making choices, not making children, not moving money around, and in doing so, not creating the kind of momentum that leads to future rebirth. So this is one way that we can think about our economic choices, including our food choices, as not just connected to an ethical idea of like, let's try to not kill, but much more deeply to the ideal of liberation from suffering entirely. So the philosophy that we could call veganism, abstaining fully, or as fully as we can, from using animals as resources for food or clothing, depending on how one defines it, is essentially a modern invention. We don't know of any indigenous cultures that have a vegan lifestyle. There are some that are very substantially fruit and vegetable based, but the philosophy of like really making a dividing line where we say these things are animal products and these are not, and we're going to abstain from the animal products for a specific ethical reason. That's a modern invention. And I think it's an invention that makes sense as a reaction to the horrors of the contemporary food ecosystem, industrial farming, the livestock system. Anyone who really has seen experienced the suffering of beings raised for slaughter, raised for meat, raised for, even in many cases, raised for wool, depending on how it's done, raised for flesh, leather, milk, can really sense, this is a relationship to be in, humans and these animals, that where there's a very unequal power dynamic, there's pain caused, there's death caused, there's killing, and use of animals as resources. And the vegan view recognizes that there's a deep kinship that we share with animals, and that in that it's a deep violence to take life in that way. So we can think of this as a kind of sentient beings centered form of eating choice. And the core philosophy there is that animals of various kinds are they have a kind of individual sentient being nature, like an individual soul, essentially, or, you know, you don't have to be, we could be Buddhist about it, but just say like they have an individual experience of being, right? And so uh, so the first precept would say, we choose not to kill. And then we make the extension, because not a lot of folks in the modern food economy are doing the killing themselves. We make the extension to like, oh, I also want to not support the killing of these animals, and so then I'm not going to buy the meat and the products, you know, in any way. But there are other ways of interpreting the edict not to kill. And the other primary way that I see expressed as an ethical guideline nowadays is what I'm calling an ecosystemic approach that doesn't foreground the individual sentience of animals, but foregrounds um, the well-being and the um, the wellness and well-being and the consciousness of well-being in the entire ecosystem. And so this is an approach that would say, you know, for instance, that you know, in pursuit of you know, a protein, that it's actually less harmful for and I'll say me, because it's partly what I do, that it's less harmful, or we might say differently harmful, in a way that I'm willing to bear, to you know, to eat the eggs from our backyard chickens. We have 15 chickens that we keep, and they give us eggs. We feed them and keep them safe. So we're in this reciprocal relationship, and you know, it's hyper local, and it does tie me to the greater chicken ecosystem, right? We bought them as chicks, you know, from a place here in town. And there's all the details that you can find about that kind of thing. You know, you can say, oh, I only buy ethical meat. And some folks will say like, oh, that's a good compromise. And other folks will say, that's not a compromise at all. It's still killing. There's a whole range of views in this realm. But the ecosystemic view doesn't foreground the individual sentience of the animal as much as it foregrounds the well-being of the entire ecosystem. So I might say, oh, I'm choosing this rather than, for instance, you know, shipping in protein-dense foods that are not based on animals, let's say tree nuts, from distant places, you know, with all of the impact that causes. And none of these are, some of these are obvious choices, and some of these are very unobvious choices. And so what I want to point to is that the choices are always supported by a view, right? So the vegan choice is supported by a view of individual sentient beings, right? Whereas, for instance, like the ecosystemic view can tend to be supported by a more animist worldview that recognizes that there's not actually a distinction in types of consciousness between, you know, a human, an animal, a flower fairy, a redwood tree spirit, the god Shiva, you know, a demon, a ghost of an ancestor. That these are all different kinds of bodies that we could be born into. All of these beings can become liberated eventually through practice. And so there's not actually a fundamental difference between them. There's just a difference in form, very temporarily. So what happens to our ideas about what it means to kill and eat if we hold, you know, this animist view differently from the individual sentient being's view? And I'm sounding like I'm defending the animist view more, and this is partly because the most vocal critics of Asian-style vegetarianism, including Indian vegetarianism that includes, you know, a lot of milk and cheese and yogurt, or Chinese-style vegetarianism, which doesn't have so much dairy but does have eggs. You know, the most vocal critics of this are the vegan activists, who are often quite fierce in their denunciation of other choices. And so then I want to uplift, for instance, the animist style choice, not as better, but as another choice based in a view that one could inquire into. And what we want to do with all of these choices is to find where's the suffering, not just the suffering like, oh, there's, does the chicken suffer? Does the animal being killed for meat suffer? Yes. But also, where's the suffering of views? What is binding one to the wheel of birth and death? And so I think it's actually a beautiful evolution of the Buddhist doctrines on nonviolence for these gorgeous, radical vegan viewpoints to arise, and for the gorgeous, radical, modern animist viewpoints to arise. They're both modern reconstructions and remixes of ancient ethical theories. And they both arise, and many other views, by the way, about how we might eat, within specific sets of conditions. So, views about how we choose what to buy and eat, for instance, no matter what we choose, if we have a view that's based on choice at all, it's a view based on, for instance, not being in poverty, actually having food choice, the fact that you have a grocery that you can go to and buy a number of different things and even think about what you prefer. That's a positionality based in a certain kind of social economics and positionality and wealth and safety and privilege. Again, those are not bad things. Those are wonderful things. It's wonderful to be able to choose your food. But again, we don't want to, I am unwilling to, make something that is a privileged choice not available to everybody into an ethical universal, that if someone is not following this, then they are, committing an ethical misconduct. And so you want to notice all of the conditions around the view that we hold. What are the forces that support me having the ideas that I have? And then as a practitioner, how do I practice with that guideline to not take life, the first precept, right? How do we understand that as playing out in all of our, in all of our relations? And, all the many situations that we find in our life. So, just laying out that landscape, I think, as a way to just encourage our inquiry into the choices we're making and the conditions that make it possible even for us to make those choices, and what kinds of identities, positionalities we are, expressing as we make the choices that we make. And that's going to be true for all the precepts and all of our ethical choices. But this is one of the prime examples right now where an ethical choice can seem to be, cut and dry or completely obvious, but almost never is. So, I'll pause there. Hi, blessings in your practice. Thanks for watching. If these resources are supportive for your meditation and your practice, liking and subscribing helps the channel. And there are links in the description below to donate to support the Sangha and my own teaching. And you're welcome to come and join the Tuesday night gathering, which is on donation and open to all. And you can find information for that on the website. So blessings in your practice. Take care.